Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. Last week we took a pit stop on the island of Drum in order to pick up a new Straw Hat. And this week we are plunging into the war zone that is the desert island of Alabasta to finally take on Sir Crocodile. The Alabasta arc serves as the epic conclusion to the first Grand Line saga and consists of a whopping 63 manga chapters and 39 anime episodes, making it more than twice as long as the longest current arc in the series, which was the Arlong arc. In fact, to put all of this into some crazy perspective, by the time the Alabasta arc finished, it accounted for almost a quarter of the entire One Piece series, and that's a hell of a lot for just one of 10 arcs. So Alabasta really is our first experience of what One Piece would be like going forward. It really takes its time to set up wonderfully detailed locations, characters, and complex social situations. For example, when previously on an island, we'd really only visited a single town. However, in Alabasta, we visit several locations across the country, including Nanohana, Yuba, Rainbase, and the capital, Alubana. And I particularly enjoyed this because up until now, the islands of the Grand Line had always felt incredibly small to me, as if you could traverse the entire thing within a single day. So it's really cool to see a large landmass like Alabasta. Although as a result of building all of this, Alabasta can feel quite slow in comparison to the pacing we're used to at this point, especially in the anime, which adds quite a lot of filler. But I believe that in the end, this slow pacing is entirely worth it. As I mentioned before, Alabasta features a heavily expanded cast of characters bombarding us on all sides. For the good guys, we are introduced to the ruler of Alabasta, Nefertari Cobra, aka Vivi's father. Cobra's two right-hand men are Chaka and Pell, both of whom possess Zoan-type devil fruits, and both of whom are heavily involved in the war that breaks out in Alubana. But I have to say that these three are probably the least interesting of the new characters because they're just kind of your stock standard good guys doing good things because of good reasons. Although Pell in particular definitely makes a big controversial splash. Also on the side of the good guys sort of is Koza, the leader of the rebel army. He's a super serious looking dude bro who I've never really cared for, although he does have a somewhat nice flashback featuring Vivi and himself as children. But with so many other amazing characters introduced during this arc, I think that Koza very much gets pushed to the sidelines in my mind. And jumping straight into those amazing characters, for the bad guys we are treated to the remaining and most fearsome members of Baroque Works, almost all of which have their own devil fruits as well. And I have to say that apart from the comic genius that Bon Clay brings, these guys are quite intimidating and comprise a force of bad guys to really be taken seriously during this arc. Of course, we are also officially introduced to their leader and warlord of the sea, Sir Crocodile, who in my personal opinion remains one of the greatest villains of the series, as well as greatest characters in general. His design is phenomenally cool and really evokes that mafia boss sort of feel, and his Logia Devil Fruit is one of the most powerful things we'd seen in the series thus far. Furthermore, Crocodile was an incredibly sound tactician, who made me feel that he really possessed a dangerous degree of high intelligence. To this day, I will praise Crocodile's plans in Alabasta as absurdly well thought out. The only reason he was unsuccessful is because he was that little bit too arrogant and really needed to kill Luffy when he had the chance. And he had 2 chances to do so, by the way. But that brings up the fact that Crocodile did indeed defeat Luffy twice during this arc before Luffy finally overcame him in the 3rd bout. But he was the first villain Luffy seriously fought in the series who actually trounced him, in some fairly brutal ways as well. Crocodile was just that awesome and definitely represents the epitome of villainy. But we also have some characters who don't belong to either faction introduced in this arc. Most prominently, Luffy's brother Portghast Ace makes his way into the story. And this was a fairly shocking moment for those who thought they knew everything about Luffy's past from his initial beginnings in Chapter 1. And as for Ace himself, well, he was just super cool and really exuded power in a way that made it clear that he was leagues above where the Straw Hats currently sat. And a nice fun fact, this is also the very first time we hear of Whitebeard, the strongest man in the world. Ace actually invites Luffy and the Straw Hats to join the Whitebeard pirates, which Luffy plainly refuses. Alabasta also saw a couple of return characters, namely Smoker and Toshiki. These two had been pursuing the Straw Hats ever since lockdown, so I was really pleased to see them show up at the climax of the saga. Although I was slightly disappointed that Smoker doesn't actually participate in the War of Alubana. However, it does give Toshiki a much needed opportunity to shine in her own right. Finally, we also see the return of Mr. 3 from the Little Garden arc, and at this stage I quite like the ongoing mechanic of defeated Baroque Works agents from the previous arc returning in the next arc. And while he doesn't do anything of any particular importance, it was nice to have some threads tied together through his presence. So there we have our players, and yes, it takes a lot of time to satisfactorily set them up, but I feel like conducting a war without a wide cast of characters might be a bit shallow. Instead, this is a proper large-scale event, providing some very nice battlegrounds for the Straw Hats and Baroque works. And Alabasta has some of my favourite fights in the entire series. The Straw Hats vs Baroque works have an iconic moment in every single fight, and really set the standard for everything to come after. And just as in the Arlong arc, the Straw Hats get a nice chunk of character development amongst all this chaos. I'd like to particularly emphasize Usopp and Chopper's fight against Mr. Four and Miss Merry Christmas, because this is the point where I 100% converted into an Usopp fan. He'd been growing on me slowly, very slowly, but the way he conducted himself in this battle and his speech about believing in Luffy were just perfect, and it was fantastic to see how he just continues to outthink his opponents. On the complete opposite side of that spectrum is Zoro. His battle was very much an exercise in keep getting hit until you win. Mr. One absolutely decimated him and left Zoro with injuries that really should have just diced him into pieces. However, watching the future world's greatest swordsman learning how to cut steel is one of my all-time favourite moments in the series. And I also need to give a special shout out to Nami, who after almost 200 chapters and over 100 anime episodes finally got her first proper one-on-one battle. And although a lot of it was comedy, she really pulled this one together and proved why she belongs on this crew. As promised, Sanji also gets his well-deserved moment during Alabasta. After having been scarcely present during Whiskey Peak and Little Garden, Sanji saves the day in Rainbase by kicking the huge Banana Wani. And he also goes on to have a fairly amazing fight with Bon Clay, but was it worth his lack of involvement in 2 whole arcs? Well, who knows, but at least Alabasta treats him well. Then of course there's round 3 of Luffy vs Crocodile, and words actually fail me when I think about this fight. This is one of the most incredible pieces of action to have ever been produced in the world of manga and anime. I just love the way that Luffy had to push himself to his absolute limit, and as a result, Crocodile's defeat is glorious in every way. Now moving on to Nico Robin, and she plays a more quiet role than I think most of us expected going into this arc. Obviously in hindsight, that's because her proper story had yet to be told. However, through her we learn about the ever-intriguing poneglyphs. We don't learn much, mind you, but enough to open up the door to the ancient world of One Piece. And that world expands a little further by giving us the very first mention of the ancient weapons. And it's always very good to remember that the ancient weapon Pluton is in fact in Alabasta. Finally, we have to touch on the arc's perfect bittersweet ending, featuring Princess Vivi's tearful goodbye. At this point, I'd really grown to love Vivi, and the idea of her not continuing with the Straw Hats was a bit tough. I mean, perfectly understandable because she had a kingdom to run, but still, she and Karoo would have been fantastic members of the crew. However, what we got instead was an unparalleled moment of beauty, as the Straw Hats silently said goodbye to their friend and moved on to their next adventure. So in conclusion, Alabasta is a wonderfully structured long-form arc that evolves storytelling in One Piece to a more complex level. Furthermore, this arc elevates almost every aspect of One Piece, including combat, the greater world, and the core group of characters we've come to know and love. I'm sure I've said this somewhere before, but if the Arlong arc is where One Piece becomes great, then Alabasta is where the series jumps into a league of its own. And that about does it for Alabasta. Next week we'll be starting fresh and embarking on an entirely new saga by stopping in on the island of Jaya. If you enjoyed this video, then feel free to like, favorite or subscribe, and please do comment with your thoughts on Alabasta. This has been the Grand Line Review, and I'll see you next time.